Well, this is videos in response to Judge Napolitano's interview with Moats into the world, and for America, but for countries A through Z, being and having been systems tactical ulterior, while pretending other, while being used remotely, tactical ulterior from how we are in human species individual body, of individual bodies, with all grouped differences, that has other species bodies also this way, where we could discern the body that is generating all things plural, even if we make them up like art. Its identity is coming to, from, as, with, and for the smallest finite details of art or of anything real, distinctly from, well, as, would not, but anyway, the order of the finite, or the smaller finite detail we could grapple with, for example. And while simultaneously, distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously what is active and grouped. And like, for example, we are shown the seasons that are not even here yet, how they are valued. But see, we have words like value, use tactical ulterior from the identity of relativity / hyper-relativity that nature itself is and has been showing us. People have been using, like the nature debate. George Galloway with Moats knows has a lot of knowledge of good and evil. I'm not trying to say he's evil or something like that, because of that phrase from the beginning of the Old Testament. But for example, where the religions and where the cultural things are subject, no one knows how to, where they have all formal voices, everyone has failed to bring up how black people's whites of eyes. Nature itself shows us that breaching method, forced, tricked, hurt, and persuaded from off the identities of the campuses. Not just collusion there, hyper-additional apparent motivations and real ones, hyper-additional, but with all location. / that's everywhere the species body is, where no one wanted collusions with. But a breaching method forced, tricked, hurt, and persuaded people to blame other things, others, or selves. And it showed and shows them how they can't appreciate. They need to value how it had passed. Now they need to value how we had breached education. And then hyper-additional motivations. We knew that we had these abilities, the ability to discern. I'm not a lawyer. The gateway, for example, the ability to discern how self-value, not just for apparent and real motivations. Lawyers fake and change details and separate and force a quality of fact-keeping nature that is not just incapable, of affording exception nature proper and nuances. It is forcing a quality of fact-keeping nature as criminal insidious nature, pretending for other reasons, even more real reasons. That's also being and have been used remotely, criminally foreign influence / hyper-criminally foreign influence. Increasingly at countries A through Z, even how they create all that tied to peaceful energy generation. More and more things that will create needs for people to have to keep secrets and be secretive. And while simultaneously needing to pretend other, and they're speaking about truth and free speech, forcing nature of debate to get over on what's not debatable, like black people's whites of eyes, or this would have been brought up. Polling campuses. We don't even have to poll. Anyone who denies this, it will have inherent to, active to, and progressive to their logic, their nature of logic. On off the state of Connecticut corrections offices and the judicial branch offices and different natures of conjunctions to it. Is exploited where and how there are still, timed use / S that they don't even realize. People even all the way up to former director of the F.B.I, Robert Luskin. I don't know where he lives, but he's involved with people from Washington, D.C., increasingly involved with identity theft, fraud, slanders against me. And attaching me and everyone around me, including my family, to fake and change communications with themselves and with others, and about the world trade, and with the Weathersfield police that faked conversations with me when I was a kid and then as an adult. They have time collusions with overt criminal enterprises and private ones. Now, these are things that the agency has an extent of knowledge that this is at least plausible. And this is also where and how the agencies communicate confessions. Like former director of the F.B.I, Robert Luskin, he's recorded non-verbally confirming to what syntactically a Thaddeus Grabowski sought me out as a stranger to repeat about my father's car and his demonstration of a role with people on Hang Dog Lane, and Two-Route Highway, through time increasingly involved with speaking illusions off campuses and behind people's backs at campus identity theft, fraud, slaves, but it's also from off the campuses. They have the family members of the security, the differences of guilt that's hid behind by countries that were united here and there before our countries and while our countries were founded. This maintained and maintains a certain type of victim / hyper victim predator / hyper predator in defenses of that syntactically as collusion / S. It's recorded where and how, not just on and off the judicial and corrections offices. They have collusion / S with all kinds of natures and methods of organized crimes at all locations / S. The breaching method showed everyone they have collusion. You have collusions with black pupils, white survivors, leaving this out. You have right there to discern how you are a victim / hyper victim of what we have simultaneously right there too, means to discern other things, others, or selves being and having been forced. And where there are roles needed to pretend that anyone could or did speak for the law or the sciences properly and as exceptions properly. So we have Boolean logic treatments. We have nature debate. You guys that leave out what is true always. Plus, nature's identity itself is showing us there are other species bodies with two eyes, and humanity didn't invent that. And where there are exceptions, they're all demonstrations of the same thing. The fish didn't invent it, but they have two eyes. We didn't invent it. All the birds, the fish, even the insects, it looks like they have two eyes. Oh, they have 1,000 eyes. It looks like two eyes. In other words, even when there's one cell, what do they call it? I forgot. They call it just cell duplication. But in other words, alpha and omega are inseparable. But their roles with its way of communication about positive and negative the way we know, where we are temporary / lasting. But then it has three identities. It has an identity relationship to itself that is actively. Like we know, we are shown that we have 3 parts of time bound. We know of those seasons that are not even here yet as value, as its identity in relationship to itself, nature's identity itself. We have with the word nature, we are being shown by nature itself to use as our name hyper-additional for identity. The same reason we need more than one word for a verb. And all the parts of speech, the ancients, more probable and demonstrable, they would have referred to, because nature is showing us it is functional, how its body is hyper-invisible but still discernible. We know that all the other species, all the other bodies of the human species body, of individual bodies, non-distinctly, we know that one part of time is true always, the past. One time of what is active group now. And like with the seasons, we know it's to come. See, but this is about where and how we could be led by that a distinct identity of hyper-invisible but still discernible. those three parts of time. Like, in other words, we know active truths now always. So we have to understand how the individual, the finite, it shows us its value by the order of the finite, or the difference between the smallest finite details or the order of the finite too. Because in other words, and a bunch of reasons being generated by that one identity that we can discern to an extent, slash as. And you know, in other words, but we know we don't have to polish ourselves. We know that we have been systems tactically ulterior from that capable of affording to be short words proper by the nuances and the revelations with them that come with where and how that identity, to the extent we can discern, it comes with its complete identity in relation to itself, which is distinct here where we are juxtaposed with matter, which is here distinct here where that is gaining with a portion of it that is gaining itself as itself with this. In other words, with the active grouped parts that are being generated by it, but now we are generating as systems that have ignored while being and having been used remote, ignoring. See, this preaching of the names of the people of the sciences, blame other things, others, ourselves as styles forced by nature itself, the same way nature forces in boxing, for example, styles, and boxing, martial arts, and wrestling, and being about fighting, by fighting it by the rules. But the rules have been tactically abridged / hyper-tactically abridged since ancient times by a method that's measuring and maintaining. You know, self-value. The reason it's self-value because that's where and how I want to be remote, but blaming other things, others, ourselves, where and how economic syntax and subject treatments have left out how James Madison's communications, for example, the human fact treatment nature breaching method, clearer than day, that was entrenched in the value of those laws, for example, against everyone sickly distinctly. They were value as three ways manifest by nature's demonstration of it and of its body to an extent, a torture, extortion, and slavery method. A human fact treatment nature breaching method reassigned what black and white communicate. In other words, and where we have a distinct species body of individual bodies. But again, now we have all group differences appreciated syntactically through an as systems tactical ulterior from the one that is led by what is true always, not leaving out the slightest exception. Not, in other words, that's the Constitution unabridged. And why and how we have rights are too numerous to have to list them. There are people involved with remote uses of the sense and sensibilities of the interbranch family members. And I say it that way because this is multi-front, sickly, distinctly against the strengths and weaknesses of each age, which each age was and is, giving us a strength that the other ages don't have. But see, that strength, what people call as competition is not competition. In other words, this breaching method showed names A through Z of the people of the sciences at countries A through Z, where and how they have to pretend their integrity. There are styles forced by nature. The only way they can get away with it is self-valuing, how it has been too. The breaching method that was entrenched did not permit our founders free speech. They were worse than being extorted, but we're not even being allowed to be honest about the extortion of George Washington, or it would have brought up James Madison's plan and the founders behind him, and that leverage to extort, to break the rules syntactically of the torture, extortion, slavery method of every single person, not just Native Americans, but had been sustained against Native American countries A through Z had been sustained. It took to humanity to defenses of the syntactically the names of the phenomenon of countries, of colonies before this, of the international companies involved with them, of economic syntax, value syntax, value nature appreciation, where and how the breaching method needed and needs criminal insidiousness natures of positive treatments and negative treatments as collusion. It needs a shell game, not discerned as a shell game. And in case that does, or where and how it does, it's discernible. In other words, worse involved with it. In other words, even with the counters to it, to maintain, measure, and maintain other things, others, ourselves. Blame for things that nature itself communicates to us, and that our founders communicated to us, but replaced right from the replaced, not just taken, stolen, replaced right from the communications of James Madison and of the founders behind him and his plan, and of proper treatments of George Washington and their use of this plan. In other words, which was to counter not just criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions, wrought, internationally monitored conversations, which had slavery sickly distinctly north and south, but also non-distinctly. And then America's founders were born. And people have roles with summaries of American history, and then pretending people didn't do their homework because of how the books have and have had collusion /S with many natures and methods of organized crimes that are fact-cheating nature oriented. Like predicate acts of facts, wire crime acts and methods. The intelligence community, Wethersfield Police, they attached me to fake conversations with them at the Wethersfield Police Station. It wasn't at all. And then as an adult too, sickly distinctly. When I was an adult, I was there at the window. I had one word in my life of conversation with the older Mendez police brother. He pretended I did other. He has roles with people with the name Demoro, who said that people with the name Scalora are their cousins. And they have rules with people behind my back putting fake things in databases with their teachers and with the I don't even know who, and their the only one teacher I know was tied to a Joe Demoro is a Mr. Neville with a Neville family interstates and intercities along Route 3 too, no, with a Joe Demoro and others, and people with a Mr. Abruzzi involved with former director of the F.B.I, Robert Luskin, with Central Connecticut State University and the Great Superior Court. The Great Superior Court people, Hartford Court people, and their families' intimate ties with foreign and domestic military that recorded, confess, demonstrate, confirm things not knowing. Also has collusion /S with intelligence families from Wethersfield, as the ones I caught with were years apart, child abusers, leaders of kids, First Forest. I recorded them for roles forcing it. And further then and now, also with medical families, putting fake transcripts, ones with badges, ones involved with the World Trade Center too. WFSB attached me to fake conversations with themselves and with others at the same time as the interbranch switch names and sequences. These are things that are hyper-evidential. The branches of government, they make confessions when they change and fake what we say, when they speak their motivations. Partially, their motivations are in other words, we have the right to use what we have been prohibited the right to use, like syntactically, like the hyper-evidential. So to speak, we have the hyper-evidential having black people's rights of eyes, having had other things, others ourselves. blamed for things that nature itself and that our founders communicated for us to understand was about a human fact-driven nature breaching method and rolls with itself and its use /s of syntax at all locations /s. Otherwise, and that was all every body against every other body and against themselves syntactically. Otherwise, that body was sent to an extent, and they had to pretend other to an extent. Otherwise, that body was incensed. Not rolls with the psychopath calmness or the psychopath's aggressions that were of the array and are of the array of like A through Z, everything, their differences with themselves, as the names of countries, as the locations, areas, and states operating and using those names, styles, needs, and natures needing to self-value, like the integrity of it. Regarding the evidence is that there's no integrity at countries A through Z. And then people want to use that, like, for example, that wars are serious to mean things that they don't over here and there. This has the suits and ties, counters, and exceptions measured and maintained, leaving out how the breaching method reassigned database relationships since before computers, reassigned the value of ancient sciences, of the campus Marcius that the republic for which we stand is dependent upon. That which every individual, and this breaching method uses the difference between A through Z campuses as appreciated by the syntax, the nature of debate of people A through Z, otherwise that body is sensed. In other words, it measures and maintains and used not just wrongly, not just criminally for influence, but hyper-criminally for influence. This breaching method knew that it would have to keep people blaming other things individually grouped and together as styles, needs, for things that nature will continually demonstrate to us. Nature shows us that a human fact-driven nature breaching method is one of the singular values that is constantly true always. That those laws that were entrenched in America before it was America, before America's founders were born, they're making and keeping our campuses have roles, keeping the nature of debate, criminally forward influence, tactically delusions, wrought. Our founders directed us to refer to them plural as our founders, as James Madison singular, as they. This nature of debate. So the names of the people, the sciences, for example, so they wouldn't be able to use, oh, you don't know that, then what do you know what you're talking about? This is what they don't know what they're talking about. I'm not a lawyer. I learned from an accomplished pro se litigant that the definition of Marbury versus Madison is that real justice must satisfy all appearances of real justice. Either the nature of debate regarding don't shoot until you see the whites of eyes. You guys have left out and have had self-valued roles with having been left out while you're defending it now. The nature of debate quality, like regarding what if that's cipher to be deciphered? We know that our founders did not have free speech at the time. Even once he was a president, James Madison did not have free speech. We're supposed to get the Constitution unabridged, the Republic unabridged, and the campus Marcius it depends upon, unabridged. And to its identity discern where, in other words, where it is not, in other words, where there's pollution, the campuses are criminally foreign influence. Before that, there's, in other words, not honest sciences, not sane sciences. While as collusion /s, that's what spoke for and speaks for. All locations /s since founding. Since they had internationally monitored conversations that had and has the design of suburbs, tactically denatured a landscape theater, only capable of having nature demonstrate with negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures. One's the breaching method effectively assigned, blamed on other things, others, ourselves, because it assigned the only means for people to defend themselves or to cause positive value nature progressions, acts, and natures, or counters to all the force, negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures, and criminal insidious natures of positives, treatments, collusion with that, collusion slash S, and keeping the identity of relativity to ourselves of the human fact, human nature breaching method. That again, nature itself and the communications of our founders properly conceived or appreciated. In other words, people are keeping things going before courts, or or between, or with police interactions on the sides of that. The difference of that is used remotely too. Their sources increasingly the neighbors of and other nature families of conjunctions to retired mayors, demonstrably standing mayors. In other words, roles with what is manifest where the interbranch forge and switch names and sequences. And they have roles with predicate acts, with facts, acts, and methods, with names on all sides of criminal and civil cases at the same time. The news, names next to the news, relative to where and how we could discern. These are people connected at and next to the campuses, where there are subject treatments, where there are names treatments, where there are difference treatments, therefore names treatments. We are shown the identity of hyper-relativity. It's showing us we have the same color eyes and different color eyes at the same time, where it is projecting this. That which has all these different species distinct, but also non-distinct and simultaneous, but slash hyper simultaneous. Because also showing the parts of itself, where and how it shows us we can only discern its body to an extent. The body of all space slash existence 3 ways. 3 distinct identities of hyper invisible but still discernible. The present participle and the past participle as names hyper additional for a verb. They're about time slash forever nature. They're about why and how there's an extent to the past that we can discern is true. We know is true always, while we know simultaneously, actively, now truth to an extent, truth slash truths to an extent. But more and more, that singular truth is for hyper additional reasons incapable of being discerned by everyone, even where and how it will only increasingly demonstrate itself to everyone. That's why how it's critical to understand where and how we've been systems tactical ulterior the natures. Connecticut's district court has people involved with all kinds of natures of organized crimes, with prosecutors and judges and their family members of work criminal enterprises, private ones, proven child abusers, leaders of kids, years apart, and a bunch of people at Harvard Hospital's Institute of Living, as ones involved with UConn, with all kinds of, with law and wire crime acts and scams with intelligence, also with the buildings next to Harvard Hospital through time, and with the difference of people that from other areas, like Eric Jensen, with recorded capacity demonstrated confirmed, as one of the people from other areas who sought me out to make fake exception on my street, confession demonstrated confirmed. These are people involved with state police along the Berlin Turnpike and the family members of judges and their extended family members, like probate court judges, is concentrated with the people at and next to Wrought Highway, involved with identity theft, fraud, slanders, and wire crime acts and methods where they change. Like if you catch in digital crimes, so the principal upskirt nature, the principal child abuser, they report he's in jail for upskirt pictures. He was involved with the police chiefs retired in their intimate families, and more with the security families with the schools. Also with digital crimes, Facebook has rules. With the Britain's Superior Court's Facebook page with predicate acts, with people that have been since before the World Trade Center attack, involved intercities of Connecticut, with people on the Wethersfield judicial branch offices and the corrections offices. Also with the spot of a serial killer, even if it was made up, that serial killer himself is involved with those same names with Sandy Hook campuses and a prison there. And these are people with wire crime acts and methods, with intelligence families, how they are actually associated with fire departments. As ones with the probate court judges, like associated with the Delafair family, has roles with identity. I saw them in campuses. They were pretending other behind my back to people, directly, indirectly, the people around. So people have repeat fake things. These are people increasingly collusion /S with names on all sides of cases, the lawyers, the family members, the sources, in the courts at the same time, in the news at the same time, and with the World Trade Center attack, predicate acts. The same names involved with child abuses with the kids, leaders years apart, even if it was to pretend to be undercover or whatever like that, because they have roles with acting professors in the different departments of the campuses, recorded how used by the federal and the intercities. The way the breaching method shows them they have to, because of what was actually recorded value in the past, active now, and increasingly. A Debbie Gold and her father and a Lee Gold. A Debbie Gold, she put fake things in database about me and pretended that I communicated with her before that. I yelled at her because she was repeating yelling at me. I don't know what she said in the database. And I never saw her around school. There was like one exception years ago. We did a drill on the floor. We were in a school. Someone made that exception, and we had only it was a brief incident. They're increasingly people tied to the former mayors have been making exceptions as people involved with overt criminal enterprises, private ones, and various natures of federal criminals and their family members, increasingly at each campus I went, who were in backgrounds putting fake things in databases about me. And the campuses themselves recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed. There are people with the courts involved. I knew there was more, and there are a whole bunch of other countries at the same time, and overt criminal enterprises and private ones originally and still, because that's also what this is about: black people, white survive, and those things that were used to blame that were truths. Maybe even when they're truths, they use them for lies. We can discern this. They use them to screen truths. We can discern that replaced right from our founders. We can discern how they have maintained that. The people who know the most, they're trying to make it a competition rather than going by what's principle. It would have brought this up, regardless of the person is the name of the people, the science, like American history or not. This is also about like how the law people rely on the American history people. They're supposed to know since they're little kids. No one had free speech. That's why they had to have a civil war forced by James Madison's plan. James Madison still doesn't have free speech. They replaced the breaching method right from the communications of him, right from reality's communications to us. They have readings of statutes of precedent, words like reality. Words like mental health, criminally formidable, tactically, delusions, wrought, all kinds of natures of predicate acts with facts, rules concentrated on the suburbs, let alone on New York City. Now, any country in the world, see America, Russia, and Ukraine, they have suburbs that are manifest, even though Russia was before us, a country. Already the breaching method that was entrenched. See, it was negative how it stayed entrenched, and our founders didn't have free speech through their lifetime where they would have been sent and that would have been adapted to, including any majority of people, even if it's a majority of people trying to adapt to itself properly. Like in other words, even if it's any grouping of countries, while still locations, areas, and states, treatments of finite, grouped, and simultaneous values. The act will take from its own as the identity of hyper-simultaneous, a distinct identity of simultaneous nature that is not the other species' bodies. It is not our own, but it is that one that is all things anyway. Here many pray, boxing. Again, boxing, martial arts, and wrestling are about fighting, but by the rules. Everyone has heard the difference of Republican or Democrat described and then defended as what takes defense of quality aspects, nature of fact, treatment nature, that is reliant upon each age of fact, treatment nature having had other appreciated for short words with convictions forced on them. This is clearer than day. And many pray, but they change and fake our words. They value this being having been done, too, including what is digitally recorded. The Facebook page of Wethersfield Police have people with the intelligence community associated with a Joshua Schumack, who's recorded involved with religious and sexual and also KKK, black themed, Latino themed, and religious themed identity theft, fraud, slander with child defenders, leaders of kids, people involved from other areas with the intelligence families near me that I brought up, like with the name Collusion and Smith, brought up by people associated with it. A guy who said to a spy, I never had a personal conversation with the guy. I had a personal verbal conversation with the guy. He demonstrated to me. There's a guy who said he was to my speech class. And I did, Kevin Dillon was his partner, he said. But if Kevin Dillon, too, is increasingly one of the ones involved with multiple child abusers, leaders of the kids, and people involved with elderly homes at the same time, who are involved with other natures of organized crime with identity theft, fraud, slanders. There's a Brian Silver involved also with the Leahy family, with a Kevin Harris and his family and his mother, involved with drugs and medicines, crimes with kids, identity theft, fraud, slanders, and planting fake things on campuses. And they have other people acting to pretend things. In other words, at corners. Increasingly at foreign and domestic military associated with Quinnipiac University involved with polling. And those are criminal foreign influences, but also hyper-criminally foreign influence. And it's also the same at each of the campuses, including each age and nature of campus. But these are people involved with the Brian Silver and multiple people with the name Leahy that attached me to fake conversations with them, fake transcripts with judges and prosecutors, with medical families, ones with badges, foreign and domestic military. These are people also involved with the World Trade Center attack. They're involved with differences rackets. They're involved with how we have a whole bunch of different countries, and they're confessing this also with their refusal to get on paper, because they get the phenomenon of people near them, and then they put fake transcripts in databases, because they have to hide live progressions, because they were roles with that and other people doing it and having done that in the past. There's a woman who said she's the wife of a former mayor years before, a former Mayor Gold and his family, and people involved with writing forensics with them, with a Joshua Julian, too, for others that were recorded, confessed, demonstrate from them involved with predicate acts with the kids, various natures of organized crimes with them, and the ones with the news that have been planting evidences on the news, also planting collusions with where and how all natures of investigations and investigators who are used remotely, criminally foreign influence, tactical delusions, wrought in their campuses, and the difference of that or names next to them. Temporary, or in other words, the news WTH has been planting evidences at other corners of the streets with people who live on corners of the streets, like people who live involved with all kinds of identity theft, fraud, slanders, and medicines crimes with kids, elderly homes. The same ones involved. There are proofs with the security and probate courts roles with veterans homes too, a bunch of probate courts and their family members. I'm involved with people that live near me, involved further with their extended family members that police recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed. They're also pretending other switching, forging names simultaneously. No, they're refusing to get on paper with the New Britain Superior Court. They have a whole bunch of Facebook pages, and they have one that they've made with that. And they're pretending passions and emotions regarding that because of their roles with the names with the New Britain Superior Court, who at West Hartford locations before the World Trade Center attack. There are also Hartford Court's people. I didn't know it was Hartford Court too, but they confessed that after too and demonstrated after. Hartford Court has like an Emily or Amy involved with Eric Burgess. And his request, he told her lies and told me not to tell her. I didn't tell her because I don't know her. No, but then she confessed, demonstrated, record, but I already recorded it anyway. In other words, New Britain Superior Court, Hartford Courts, and their family members. They had collusions with former director of the F.B.I, Robert Luskin, his co-defendants like a Thaddeus Kabowski, a Dominic Leperada, and a John LeConte, and their family members and neighbors, like a Don LeConte. I never had a word of conversation with a Don LeConte. A Joe DeMoro and Heather Hansen recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed they have roles with her, planting evidences on and off campuses and next to crime scenes, and with people from the founding locations in Old Wethersfield all the way along Route 3 through time. And they have more roles with leaders of the kids. And this is where and how good people are kept evil because they need the nature of debate about it to screen their roles with a whole bunch of other countries and the hyper-foreign. The hyper-foreign needs that countries A through Z. It needs countries A through Z to blame things like blame hyper-criminal foreign influences on criminal insidious, on criminal foreign influences. There is a distinct, even though it hasn't been discerned, hyper-foreign. There were criminal foreign influences discerned or discernible with how the states, not just the colonies, had rules with slavery, because there was rules with it. Otherwise, that body was censed, including if it was a majority of people, and it was adapted to, including if it was everyone. In other words, once the breaching method got locations, areas, and states everywhere the human species body is, entertained, speaking for the sciences, tactical terror from their difference, from the different look at all the different names of the parts of your body. They have a semi-nature relationship to your singular identity. And each singular identity has a semi-nature relationship to that identity. That is not only true always, but only increasing identity of volume. That will only stay positive onto itself, still, relative to a special difference, still, which shows where there are exceptions, we can ignore it and stay systems criminally foreign influence / hyper-criminally foreign influence. Per its demonstration, nature itself, I'm not even a lawyer. We could discern how, like, which trials, what they are about, even if they are made up. There's a reason they are right next to Webb House, renamed the Webb Stevens Museum. There's a reason why they renamed it. And layering further apparent motivations and real ones from the one that is really worst involved, which is George Washington had to come to counter-extort at Webb House. Again, that now renamed the Webb Stevens Museum. They had to counter-extort because everyone was collusion / us against everyone else and themselves syntactically, therefore physically. They had to force people to break those laws syntactically and to have no chance to defend themselves without valuing roles with James Madison and his plan that George Washington was an act of helping when he came to Webb House, right next to the witch trials place next to it. Again, that now renamed. No, but, and that's right right on both sides of Main Street in Old Weathersfield. From there all the way along Route 175, Wells Road, right through Newington, all the way to Central Connecticut State University. People on off the state corrections offices and the state judicial branch offices have had a whole bunch of different countries and overt criminal enterprises, also on off campuses and other databases tied locations, roles planting evidences, fake motivations, screening actual motivations. I don't even know all their names. Increasingly, people like tied to a Joshua Stryker is also involved with Trinity College with some untimely deaths, with some Weathersfield police and FBI, and other people tied to the name Collusion involved with wire crimes and falsified police reports, including totally fake transcripts and conversations and ties to kids with police at police stations as when they were kids and then when they're adult, as people involved with time collusions with overt criminal enterprises. These are not legitimate trying to establish undercover whatever they're doing. With how they have the news also planting evidences with acting professors from Central Connecticut State University. The recorded confess demonstrate confirmed involved with all kinds of people on Church Street and Old Weathersfield too through time and ties to them. Involved with identity theft, fraud, slanders, falsified police reports, trying to plant fake exceptions, fake motivations, as people increasingly involved with proven child abusers, leaders of kids years apart. There were time use /S with that collusion /S role. Eric Jensen said the state police and others with the intelligence community on Copper Mill involved. Now I don't even know them. They try to make fake exceptions too. Involved with the people involved interstates and internationally, but also hyper internationally. And they brought this up. I minded my business through my whole life too. People of Weathersfield. These are people that weren't even in my class. They got caught in lies, putting fake things in databases so they can't get on campus on paper now. These are interbranch family members where the differences of the collusions of their kids worse or themselves. That's also being used with all the same thing with the foreign kids and adults, where how they have the roles with the crime scene syntax and the names next to them, collusion /S, like with names next to body dumping spots. Even if any or all of them were made up, there were time use /S of that. Rules were intercities. They make confessions to complicate and delay what people need to communicate. In other words, increasingly people next to Trinity College and next to Central Connecticut State University were influenced by intelligence families near me that grew up near me. That ones I don't even know what campuses they went to. In other words, and all the other ones, in other words, increasingly rolls with identity theft, fraud, slander, with police planting identity theft, fraud, slander, fake communications ties to me at the police station too, and with other people. These are also people, families with the campuses further, where their evil is where and how they change and fake what people say, and have been coached to it, and that then they need to pretend other conversation. In other words, that's why we need to get them on paper. The Weathersfield Board of Education has a Michael Emmett as one of the ones further recorded, confessed, demonstrate, confirmed involved with predicate acts against elderly, veterans, against kids. They have digital crimes with the military too, with the World Trade Center people. Increasingly, people involved with the World Trade Center attack. Also have recorded, confessed, demonstrate, confirmed names on all sides and at the Weathersfield Community Center. Involved with the ones named Cololo and tied to them, and Smith, who are names near me that the police and the other intelligence brought up with the overt criminal enterprises, private ones. They put me in fake conversations with WFSB, with themselves and with others, and with the Wethersfield Police, and with the courts. They've been refusing me writing since I was a kid. And they're increasingly involved with overt criminal enterprises and private ones. And people that know my name, I don't know their name, involved with credible threats to me. And violence in my area from other areas, because they painted themselves in corners. They say, oh, this is this person's fault, that person. There's a whole bunch of different countries involved with the ones from the other areas, involved with the same houses, with the wire crimes of the Wethersfield Police, and mail crime acts and methods. And those are inseparable from their falsified police reports and fake ties to me when I was a kid, and then when I was an adult. And I'm needing to get a response. These are people involved intercities and interstates with the World Trade Center attack and the court next to it, and names on all sides of that. People involved with Central Connecticut State University, recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed. Also confirmations of people at my grammar school who recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed. They were influenced to, people I don't know, were influenced to pretend, make a fake exception by bringing up, confessing things about Central Connecticut State University, and where the person's not going to respond because the person's just walking by. And they're lying about motivations too. They're lying about what I think about others. Like, oh, well, look at the syntax. They're fishing. So, because on a mass scale, they already have roles with interbranch planting predicate acts with facts into databases at the same time as collusions with names on all sides of cases at the same time, the news, and names at and next to body dumping spots, at and next to campuses. WTNH has people involved with more digital crimes with kids and women roles with the digital offenders of kids, also sexual and medical with overt criminal enterprises and private ones. Increasingly, people tied to a Mazzucato bakery and a modern pastry. The recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed they've been lying to those bakeries about me. But also with a Mayaro family involved with both bakeries and people with the businesses and houses next to Hartford Hospital through time, and involved with it. Rick Cianfaglio until I basically never saw Rick Cianfaglio around a Jonathan Maiano. But Rick Cianfaglio said John Maiano was involved with them, with a Tim O'Brien and a Ray Collo with federal evidence. Well, per Tim O'Brien and Ray Collo, they're involved with wire crimes with them, with the police forms in the courts. And Rick Cianfaglio said that there's a Brian Silver and people with the name Leahy involved with his family, involved with identity theft, fraud, slanders against me, and stacking fake things in databases with their teachers. He has something to do with their roles with Mr. Neville too. That's the only class I ever had with Rick Cianfaglio. Rick Cianfaglio, and that was in middle school. They were planting. These are people that are connected between each of the campuses I went. He has roles with a Harris family, with medicines crimes and people on Valley Crest Street, and when it was a campus there, the last year it was there. But they were also in the role in the forms of where they're just putting fake things in databases, and they're spreading lies about other people, all natures of identity theft, fraud, slanders, including in the roles of federal evidences crimes, while having been used remotely by foreign names. Increasingly, they have roles with a whole bunch of different countries that they've been confessing and demonstrating. Like people with the name Violet and O'Brien have roles with Koreans, with all kinds of drugs and medicines crimes, with Hartford Hospital and with UConn and with Central Connecticut State University, also with names next to it. These are also people that recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed. There's a Joseph Dennis and his brother, his neighbors involved, including with the former mayor's plural, but also as a Gold family involved with drugs and medicine crime, identity theft, fraud, slanders, putting fake ties and fake natures of ties and fake exceptions with them, with the fake ties between me and the Joe Dennis, where they made fake exceptions. to make it. I never saw Joe Dennis on campuses in my life. These are people that were not even in my classes that were pretending fake things in databases, and they make a fake exception by timing where I was going to walk. These are those are increasingly people involved with others that keep recording, confessing, demonstrating their names involved with things. No, these are people I don't even know to have any feelings about them. They went out of their way to make these behavior racketeering worse than war crimes, is what it was, and it is actually recorded too. One of the things that is also recorded where and how you guys have self-valued roles at A through Z. Blaming and having blamed other things, others, ourselves simultaneously, where you guys have roles replacing. Self-valuing haven't been replaced. What our founders communicated, and while increasingly replacing it. So increasingly people on Elm Streets in Rocky Hill and Wethersfield sought me out since I was a kid. They have roles with putting predicate acts with facts in databases, and with people who arrange the campuses where people are going to walk to lunch and things like that. And then they'll make little exceptions. One of the things they're doing is putting fake exceptions on a mass scale and just completely fake things. It's not just when the president says fake news, there are proofs because he knows that they can't. In other words, there are layers of guilt, and not one side has a side that was defended. For example, that's what, in other words, with the black pupils, whites of eyes. Those layers of guilt are discernible, where this is inseparable from what slavery was about. This is inseparable from the sciences, plural, regardless if there was slavery or not. And nature shows us. Nature shows. In other words, we can make nature shows in an organized video. And YouTube would help us if we got enough people to want to take part with the video. In other words, about making the plan that where we adapt to, knowing to how A through Z are sickly distinctly victims of a breaching method, a hyper-foreign that needs things like criminal foreign influences to stay blamed and to stay valued, having been blamed, while blaming things like criminal foreign influences, leaving out the hyper-criminal foreign influences. They are valuing, doing that syntactically, they're valuing the gangs of New York, the gangs of the cities. Real science never spoke as for New York City as collusion /S, and or also with blame regarding that. Anything to keep the hyper invisible but still discernible from being appreciated with our short words properly, let alone their protraction. We have black pupils, whites of eyes. That is short words. By that is means to discern. Predicate acts with facts. Needs, natures, and styles forced by nature itself. This is not to seek guilt. In all exception, without leaving out the breaching methods roles with this. With that unnatural. Only natural as criminal insidiousness. Nature itself shows us that too. We have things that are pretended debatable that are not, and that's gotten away with. We have to appreciate where and how, which is that we could discern the hyper-evidential. We could discern where and how. On a mass scale, there are styles, needs, natures of logic that can't pretend, they can't get away with defending integrity without valuing things serious like wars. Where they make they have relativity to other people, what they say. It's mandated law. You guys aren't supposed to change and fake what I say. Wethersfield police had digital crimes with their Facebook page too, within the Britain Superior Court's Facebook page. Since before Facebook was the thing. They have roles with the campuses too. That approves each of these campuses. So we have voices that are speaking about why and how we have problems with international commerce. You guys are incapable of doing it because you are incapable of speaking about how we started as a country. You guys are using A through Z, otherwise that body is sense, including if it's a majority. You guys are using the differences between campuses, A through Z too. I'm speaking in other words. You guys have other communicated for James Madison, his plan, and those founders behind him. There are proofs that they are Native Americans. And nature itself shows us that. So that's president/chief. You guys, in other words, A through Z, you are maintained incapable of having a legitimate debate, like regarding if it were plausible. If the real reason they said don't shoot until you see the whites of eyes, that famous phrase we all made to remember, it is plausible that it was more so meant to, so we discern the breaching methods having assigned roles, reassigning what nature communicates, prohibiting from being communicated with nature actually communicates with black and white, with black people's whites of eyes. For example, as nature's identity itself shows us things, vaccines, but we have those things in place with exception nature. There's no excuses for economies and to be value treatments, pretending they can't realize how the differences of the guilt of that or the interbranch, like with the witch trials, like slavery, in other words, counters as collusions, that this needs a raise. Blaming other things, others ourselves, for what nature is increasingly demonstrating to us. The positive value of countering how sickly non-distinctly too. And of appreciating how sickly non-distinctly too is left out. Right where we can discern roles with the breaching method is right where and how we can discern guilt on a mass scale, everyone at the same time. And we have to allow free speech to do this. Already the breaching method showed the interbranch at countries A through Z. They have to hide how they may use exceptions of examples of free speech to pretend how they don't realize. They have been preventing free speech because they've been replacing it roles or self-valuing that. Because there have been subject treatments. Forced term persuaded to only know, not be able to appreciate nuance and sequence value. The way nature shows us to appreciate sequence value. People can't be honest about what's said at the beginning of religious books because there were already and are already collusions with the differences method, the differences worse than war crimes method, singular, that all have self-value rules with plural. Suits and ties, you guys can't even debate that. This is not against Judge Napolitano and George Galloway. These are guys just playing the game the way they learn the game. And I call it a game because it's not science, /S, and the nature of debate about that comes with demonstration /S of the same thing, /S. And then further, the same thing /S as the breaching method. And as it's generating and having generated a whole bunch of hyper additional roles with itself, specifically to generate a whole bunch of hyper additional roles as styles of nature, as syntax nature, therefore as function nature. Abridged, vaccines that just things belong. So WFSPs, recording, confessing, demonstrating, confirming. They have roles intercities with intelligence next to them. That is also with names next to parks in Wethersfield, in Newington, in Hartford, where they have roles with identity theft, fraud, slanders, acting. People take pictures to put fake ties, fake natures of ties to people. Where how all natures of investigators, campuses, and cases where are used remotely too. The difference of them, who's more dealt with that, is also used by the breaching of the consciously. So please get me off the fake conversations with the Wethersfield police and the changed communications with the courts and faked with them too, involved. And they're also involved with remote uses of the sense and sensibility of Fox News, of CNN, and of MSNBC as the people involved with, this. You guys brought this up. You guys are changing and fake what we say. I should be able to keep simple. Let's keep it simple. Get me off the fake for those predicate acts. And that also recorded themselves and is recording themselves, communicating to me with their simultaneous need to pretend other and make up more things. Like the Fox News, WTNH, and WFSB. Also with the intelligence next to them. Also the F.B.I. is next to WTNH. They have roles with wire crime acts and methods with other police forms and whiting forensics names too, with state police families, interstates, involved with the same house/S, involved with a whole bunch of people from other areas since I was a kid, planting predicate acts with facts on all sides of my house and all sides of their houses. That's what it was, is recorded. Use of location/S, remotely criminally foreign influence / hyper criminally foreign influence, a hyper forensic trail. Vaccine. So whiting forensics increasingly has rules of predicate acts with facts since I was a kid, methods and names involved. And then when I was an adult, and right through kids' lifetimes, between campuses, a whole bunch of people tied to a Joshua Julian, like a Mark Violet, and people at Hartford Hospital involved with foreign and domestic military, people at UConn involved with them, with all kinds of legal scams, and they're educators. These are people involved with acting tied to predicate acts with facts stacked using databases at each of the campuses we went to. Black peoples, including fire and medical campuses. They're putting fake ties between fake transcripts on a mass scale. They ever wonder how they got along with pretending they could speak for the law so long and they left out how we have black pupils, whites of eyes. Black pupils. Wait till you learn about how they were used remotely. Self-evaluating. James Madison's communications replaced. All pace. See Marbury versus Madison. Forgiveness is to not assign guilt, but to stay on the principles. Black pupils who just please get them on paper, please, to one name and sequence.